my name is Clara. I am from Brazil. I was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, and I left here to go to college in the United States. When I was in college, I did an exchange program. And the focus of the program was studying how neoliberal globalization had impacted communities across the world and what were alternatives that were out there. So I went to a bunch of different countries and talked to a lot of people and learned from a very grassroots kind of way. I realized how much of what I was learning was also going on in my home country, and I'd never studied that. We'd never had access to that, really. It was happening around us, but when you're in school, you're not learning about those kinds of things. So I wanted to come back and work here, and I wanted to work for the community that I was raised in. And recently I joined CATCOM, which is the organization called Catalytic Communities. So I am the development assistant for CATCOM, and what that entails is doing some institutional development, some fundraising, working on communications. What we do is that we support community-based urban development in informal settlements in Rio de Janeiro. And the settlements, we call them here in Brazil favelas. And the work we do is aimed specifically to favelas, but the idea is that the lessons that we learn from here can be applied in informal settlements around the world. There's a prediction by the UN that by 2050, a third of the world's population will live in informal settlements. As the world urbanizes, the tendency is that these people will be in informal settlements. So we're trying to find solutions within those settlements to all sorts of problems. We have a news website that's called Rio on Watch that it was initially established to follow the changes that were going on in Rio because of the Olympics. So what were the things that would be happening in Rio, and how were those affecting favela residents? It's work in which the starting point is the demands of the people that are being marginalized. So that's what interested me in what Rio on Watch was doing, was the fact that it wasn't super intelligent people who were experts in a subject who were deciding what should be done. No, it was the opposite. It was going into the ground, bottom up kind of work. And it was a matter that was dear to my heart, not because my family came from a favela, but because the culture in Rio is so interconnected to favela culture. Most of what is celebrated in Brazilian culture, like samba and different religions, it all comes from favelas. So it seems unfair that we benefit from all the culture that's generated from favelas, but that favela residents are excluded from basically from so much in our society. But back in June 2013 in Brazil, throughout Brazil, but also it was very strong in Rio. We had these protests break out in around July 2013 in which people were taking to the streets to protest everything. Everything was on the table. And one of the big things that was on the table was the World Cup and the Olympics. So people were questioning, why do we have all of these investments in the World Cup when we don't have investments in the public schools and in healthcare and in education in general? So that was, and I participated, and I was in the streets and all of those things. So it was, I think it was contagious. There was this contagious feeling of being out in the streets and seeing so many people mobilized. And it was the kind of thing where I've always cared about these issues, but it got to a point where it was everyone was out in the streets, so what would you be doing if you weren't out in the streets? You know, you went there because you kind of wanted to like be part of that history. And once you were there, it was more engaging, and you were like motivated to be engaged. In college, you learn about issues, but and you might be mobilized, you might be really saddened or really motivated to act on top of them. But there's things that you read about or that you watched, and then once you like are actually on the ground talking to people and like about the issues that they're facing, that establishes a different kind of connection between you and that issue. I don't need too much to be happy, you know? It's more about like being fulfilled in what I do every day, and basically what you do every day is your work, right? So I'm always looking for things that fulfill me, and I'm usually fulfilled if I feel like I'm doing something that benefits the greater good in some way. I think what I find most satisfying is learning about different life stories. So learning about the different struggles that people are facing, learning about the different things that people have achieved, learning how they've achieved that. I think that's what I like most. I think a lot of citizen engagement often can feel really tiring and really draining. And I think that when you work with situations like this, where you're seeing people doing awesome things, it helps stay engaged. You know, when you're not only focusing on the bad stuff, when you're not only focusing on the challenges, but you're like showcasing and strengthening really incredible initiatives that are about solutions, then that's really good, and that helps keep people engaged as well. It's really hard to just be thinking about problems all the time. It's really, really challenging and draining. And if you're drained, you're not doing any good. You know, you have to be well in order to be doing well for others. The first thing that comes to mind is distribution. So I think, and that's not just, you know, distribution of like specific resources, but it's distribution of knowledge and distribution of access, and also like distribution of power. So because we have so many people that have so much to say and that aren't listened to and that don't have access to education to be able to like develop their ideas. And yeah, so I think just in general distribution, I think we have all the resources that we need. It's just a matter that they're mostly with a very small select group of people, where in reality I think that if everyone had access to the same resources, like everyone would be better off. Yeah, for you and for anyone else that is bothered by the state of things but doesn't know how to act, I think my main advice would be not to wait until you have the perfect plan for how you're going to make the world better. I think, like at least speaking from my own experience, I am often kind of paralyzed because I want to be sure that if I'm doing something, it's like the perfect thing that has every little piece in place, and that's never going to happen because you're probably only going to find out what all the perfect pieces are once you start putting things in action. So there's this concept that's called praxis. There's this Brazilian thinker called Paulo Freire, and he talks about praxis a lot. So it's the idea that you have something that you want to put out in the world. So you go and you put it out in the world, and then as you're doing that, you're going to see how it can be improved. So you're going to improve it, and then you're going to put an improved version out into the world, and then you're going to see how you can improve that version. So I think that's like the one big thing, is like to not be frozen by wanting to make something that is extraordinary and absolutely flawless, because that's not how change is made. It's by making constant improvements here and there. So one thing that I am interested in, but I haven't. It's just in the it's just an idea, for maybe one day. But I would be really interested in setting up a similar, setting up a program that was similar to the study abroad program that I did, but that was specific for Brazil and aimed at Brazilian students.
Okay.
So I don't know how I could make that happen. But it's part of what I was sharing earlier, that I went abroad and I learned all of these things, and I was like, wow, these things are happening in Brazil and I just don't know about them. And I think it would be good, not only for the students in the program, but for society in general, if the more Brazilians were aware of the issues that we have in our own country, and from a perspective from a perspective that involves affection and connection, that's I think that could be really, really helpful. So I think that in Brazil, favelas are really stigmatized. So you grow up associating favelas with drug trafficking, with violence, with stray bullets, and you don't really get to see how attached people are to the places that they come from. So, but as you learn more and more, you find out that people are actually really, really attached to the places that they're from. So, and it's in large part because people build their own communities. So when people go to a place, they don't necessarily have sewage, they don't necessarily have running water, and they start building all of that through a lot of collective action. So there's this concept in Brazil that's called the mutirão, and that's when a community gets together to do some sort of public works, so that the region has some sort of support, some sort of service. So they'll do cleaning mutirões, where they'll clean the waterways so that they don't flood and they get trash in their houses and things like that. And so as people work to build their own communities, they also work to build their own houses, and they're really attached to houses because for me, for example, if I want to live somewhere, I'll probably just buy a place, or rent a place. And these people know, they build their own houses, and that's how they establish where they live. There's this community in Rio that's called Vila Autódromo, which was a pretty small favela close to the Olympic Park in Rio. So the Olympic Park that was built for the 2016 Olympics. And soon after the Olympic plan, Rio was chosen to host the Olympics. The city decided that favela was going to be evicted. When this favela was going to be evicted, a big part of the residents no, we don't want to leave, we want to stay. Yes, we recognize that there are things that can be improved in our community, but so we want the government to do that. There's this one woman, her name is Maria da Penha. She's called by many as Dona Penha, and she's this I don't know exactly how old she is, but probably over 50, a bit older woman, small, I feel if you'd pass her by the street, you wouldn't necessarily notice her, but she has such strength, and she is so dedicated to the cause of her community. And one of the most impactful images from Vila Autódromo actually involves her. There was this one day that they had a forced eviction. What was happening is that they were going to demolish one of the houses that hadn't been marked for demolition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so residents formed a chain around the house, but the police was there, and the people that were in charge of the demolition were adamant about getting the house demolished, and they were really violent. And there's this image of Maria da Penha, who she was hit by a baton, and she's just bleeding.
By the police?
By the police, yes, because she was trying to protect her community. And I think that image and like understanding like to what extent people will go to protect the place that they live, like that is really inspiring. It's like it's just like awe. I was just in awe. Like, wow, this is that people are literally putting their bodies like on the line for this. And so yeah, I feel like Maria da Penha is definitely an inspirational woman.